Alright, so I want to go over how to set keyframes and adjust some of the features of keyframes. So I just went to After Effects and made a comp. I'm going to make a layer and go to new solid here, just so I have something to start with. I'll leave it at 100 and 100, and I picked a color, and now I hit OK. So anything that has a stopwatch, you can set keyframes on. So this item right here does not have a stopwatch anywhere in the vicinity. Until I drop down the items here and drop down the transform, then all of these, it's hard to see, but each one of these is a stopwatch. And what that means is I want to set keyframes. Okay, so you're just telling After Effects I want to set keyframes on this. That's all that does. So each one of these items is a specific thing we may want to set keyframes on. So let's say position, we want to set keyframes on. We go to where we want to start keyframes. Okay, so let's say at 0, and I want to start my keyframes with this thing off screen. So I'm going to go there, and I'll turn the stopwatch on. So that sets a keyframe. You can see the little diamond. I'll move my ticker out of the way. The little diamond right there. There's also a little blue diamond here showing me that my cursor is actually on a keyframe. You can see it toggling on and off. And that says that, hey, there's a keyframe here. Once this is on, I will never touch that again unless I want to get rid of all the keyframes. So I'm going to go to, let's say it's off screen at 0. I want it to be on screen by about 15 frames. So I'm going to move my cursor to about here. This is 10F, this is 20F, and probably in the middle of that somewhere is about 15F, which is 15 frames. I can double check it by 15 frames, and then I will drag that item into the screen. So now if I were to drag this back, click and drag it, you'll see that now it animates going into the screen. I have a first keyframe, I have a second keyframe. I didn't have to add this one or click anything to do it. Just the simple act of me moving my cursor, then moving the item, automatically sets a keyframe for that item right there. So now you'll see how I added this other one in there. Now this could be a bit dangerous because if I'm here and let's say I want to change the end position of it, I'm not on that diamond shape, but if I accidentally move it, it will add a second keyframe right there. And so now I have this where it comes up, and that's going to jump, and then it's going to go down to the next part. Now, that could be something desirable. In this case, it's not. But it definitely could be something I could have wanted, let's say. I'm going to go in here, and I can click on the keyframe and just hit backspace, and it'll delete it. And so now I have, just those 3 keyframes. And you can see I can also move these. So if I wanted these to be a little bit, let's say, slower, right? So the more space that's between these, the less speed it's going to have, okay? And if I click and drag, I can click and drag it at whatever speed I feel like it. If I go like that, it looks like it moves pretty quick. Whereas I go here, it seems like it's moving slow. You always want to hit the spacebar and preview your animation so you can see what speed After Effects is playing it back at. For now, this will be an appropriate way to do that. Eventually, you'll see it'll start to stutter and go a bit slower than it actually would play back at the end. But for now, we're good. Okay, so that's how we can just set some basic keyframes. Now again, anything with these stopwatches can have keyframes on them. Let's go back to the beginning, and let's set a keyframe for scale, and let's set the values here to 0. Okay, so I just clicked on the blue and typed in 0. So now when I hit play, you'll see nothing happens, okay, because it's at 0, it's scaled to nothing. At the very end of this, I'm going to scale this up to 100, so I'll click on that and hit 100. Some of these you will actually interact with out here to adjust them, like maybe the anchor point or position, I would do that out here. But typically scale, rotation, and opacity, I use the little sliders and numbers that are right here to adjust it, okay? So these 2 I could definitely play with out here, but these 3 I typically play with inside this, okay? So I have a start keyframe of 0 for the scale. I have an end keyframe of 100, and you'll see how it's lined up with that. So now as I hit play with a spacebar, you'll see how now it's gradually going to scale from 0 to 100. It's amazing. Now let's also add some rotation in there. So I'll go back to the beginning. I'll click on the rotation stopwatch. I'll go to, let's say, here. And I wouldn't rotate it out in there. I don't like to do that. I'm going to rotate it here. This first number is how many times it rotates around. The second number is how many degrees. So typically you want to play with this, unless you want something to really spin a whole lot. So I'm going to go with, let's say that. It's 272, which is pretty close to 90-degree increments. So now I hit play. And now you can see it's also rotating as it's coming out of there. Okay, let's play with opacity. So we'll go back to the beginning. We'll set the opacity to 0. We'll click the stopwatch. We'll go up here. We'll set this to 100. Some of these only can go so far. So opacity can only go up to 100. I can click and drag. It'll only go up to 100. If I go to scale, this will actually scale bigger than 100. It'll go, pretty much an infinite number there. Same thing with position, same thing with rotation, same thing with anchor point. Any of these other ones I can move, but opacity is kind of locked to that 0 to 100. So now let's play again. There we go. Now, if we didn't want all of these to be synced up, that's not a huge deal. I can move any of these around. If I wanted my scaling to start right here, I could have my scaling start there. Or I can have it start way back here. If I want my rotation to start way over here, I can do that. If I want my opacity to be finished by the time it gets here, I can do that as well. Okay, so you can really control a lot of things. Now this is kind of overkill for something like this, but if that's the kind of animation you wanted, then that's what you'd have to do to get all that stuff to work together. Okay, so let's delete all this animation here, and I could click the stopwatches off and that gets rid of the animation, but I'm just going to delete the whole solid and just make a new solid. That way I'm back to square one. Let's go back to position. Now instead of me opening this and opening this, it's a lot easier just to hit the hotkey P. Okay, if I hit P, that brings open position. If I hit T, it's opacity, R rotation, S for scale, and A for anchor point. Okay, it's much easier to do that. I could also hit Shift P, Shift R, Shift S, and add other ones. Or the same way I could hide those too. Okay, so I just want position out at the moment. I'm going to slide it off screen, and I'm going to turn on the stopwatch. Oops. My ticker is way over here, so it set the first keyframe there. So I'm just going to hit undo, move the ticker back, then turn the stopwatch on. So at 0, I want it off screen. At 15, I want it to be right at this edge here. Now I held shift so it goes straight. I also could have just grabbed the X direction and just drug just the X direction until it lines up with where I want it to be. Okay, so if I rewind this and hit play, there we go. Now you'll notice I'm rewinding it and hitting play every time it's done, because there's nothing that's happening after this. It just stays exactly the same area. So I'm going to use the workspace here. I'm going to go to, let's say, 1 second, hit N for the end of the workspace, and now I'll get the preview and see this. Now, if I wanted this to slow down, we talked about that a minute ago, I could increase the spacing between this keyframe and that keyframe. Okay, and now it looks like it's actually like looping. So that, again, it could be like a cool effect. If I wanted this to be faster, I could pull this really far in. Okay, but let's say that I wanted both. I wanted some areas to be fast and some areas to be slow. So I'm going to put that back at 15. And I'm going to grab both keyframes and I'm going to hit F9 on my keyboard. Okay, now I can't actually hit F9 on my keyboard because that's a hotkey for my recording software. So I'm going to right click, keyframe assistance, and F9. Okay, and now when I hit play, what we're seeing here is that the box is actually picking up speed at the beginning and slowing down right before it hits the wall. Now I'll exaggerate that some just by making these a little bit bigger. So that way we'll really get a lot more speed in the middle of this. There you go. So now you can see a little bit clearer of what exactly is happening here. It's picking up speed at the beginning. It's kind of slowly, gradually getting faster, and then going fast, and then slowing down at the end. Okay, so this is called easy easing. That's typically something we would want to do for most items in our scene. So just check that off of, I want this to be there. Speed graph, or easy ease is what you want to do. The next step we want to do is I really want to enhance this feature. I really want to control where it's fast, where it's slow. So I'm going to make sure position is clicked here. I'm going to click on this graph, and I'm going to right click and make sure that speed graph is showing. Okay, typically the value graph is up by default, and this is basically showing here is the X direction, which is in red, and here's the Y direction. And if we looked at just the X, I can right click on position and separate these so we can focus on one at a time. We look at just the X direction, we can see that that's what's happening, is that it's slowly picking up speed, going fast, and slowing down again. Okay, it's very neat how that works. If I drag these handlebars, just like you have the pen tool, if I drag those handlebars like this and like that, what we're going to get is very, very slow movement at the beginning, super fast in the middle, and then very slow again at the end. So let's rewind this and hit play again. There we go. Okay, now this is the value graph, and typically we don't work in this in the at the start of it. It's a little bit confusing for people to understand, but that's what this is doing. Okay, we want to play with these. We're going to use the speed graph for that. So I'm just going to right click and then unseparate. I'm going to right click here and say edit speed graph, and I'm just going to make sure that these are back to hit the graph again, right click, keyframe, easy ease. There we go. Make sure this is back to this little hill. And what the hill is basically doing is it's just a single graph of this is how fast it's going. It's going slower, picking up a lot of speed right here, and then going slower again. Okay, so the fastest part is right here in the middle at the very top. So if I were to drag my mouse over one of these points here, I get a little handlebar. And if I just click and drag the handlebar to the right, it moves the speed to the right, or to the end of the animation. If I drag my handlebar here, drag this handlebar back, what this is doing is basically making it going super slow and then super fast right at the end. So I'm going to give a little bit more work area and then hit play. So now we have super slow, and then boom, it just smacks right at the end. Whack. Now let's go the other way. Drag it this way, drag it that way, and then hit play. So now we have it fast at the beginning and slow at the end. Okay. Now these are desired effects for different things that we may want to animate. So at some point you may want to go all the way left, all the way right, in the middle, a little bit left, a little bit right, whatever it is. You have to be the judge as to what is going to work. But this is how keyframes are going to be set for these kinds of things. Just a quick little thing again. Okay, I'm going to go back to my position, back to 0. I say I'm going to set keyframes. Set my keyframes. I go to my easy ease, back to the graph editor, make sure it's on speed graph, and then where do I want this speed to happen? So I'm going to say all the way at the end. So go super slow, wham. Okay, and maybe a little bit more enhanced there. There we go. Cool. So that's how you'll adjust those. Now, one more step that'll kind of make this feel a little bit more complete is adding motion blur. So I'm done on the graph. I'm going to click this off. I'm going to go to my item here. I'm going to go to my motion blur, which is this button right there, and I'm going to make sure it's checked on for that layer. And then I'm going to go over here and say, now I want to see what the motion blur looks like. So you'll see that's what that's doing to it. It's amazing. Let's hit play. So we feel that it's moving a lot faster now because of motion blur that's on there. And if we go, frame by frame-ish, you'll see the motion blur kick in, especially right at the end. That looks awesome. Okay, and any one of these things can have that same thing happen to it. Here's rotation. Let's go to the end. Let's do a little rotation. Let's say 180 degrees. let's go to easy ease. And because the motion is happening at the end, let's also take the rotation at the end and make that happen fast too. And I want to see the position. I think those are not synced up. Yep, see the rotation and position are not synced up, so it looks weird. So just sync them up. There we go. So that's how you set keyframes. That's how you add the easy ease, and that's how you play with the graph editor. Anything that has stopwatches can be animated. Anything from here where we would go to, let's say, distort and spherize. Change the radius. Okay. You'll see that the radius has a stopwatch, so that can be keyframed. The center of the sphere can also be keyframed. So I could actually animate this moving around also. Again, something that may be desired. Now there's no hotkey to get that down here. It's just a matter of opening up that effect to see those stopwatches and then animate it. You'll even see some other stuff here, like here's the effect opacity. This is like all the effects kind of coming in. Delete that effect just by clicking on it and delete. Same thing with, let's say we went to color correction, we went to hue and saturation. This channel range covers all of these three things here. So I may want to adjust the hue of this, or the saturation of this, or the lightness of this, and animate that thing kind of coming on or going off. Okay? All of those have stopwatches, all of those can be animated. Each item has their own stuff. So here's a piece of text. Okay, we don't know what the properties are. Let's open it up. You'll see with this one we have a text and a transform. Open up transform. Here's all those same things. So anchor point, position, scale, rotation, opacity. Open up text, and here's the source text. So I can actually rewind this to the beginning, set a keyframe, go to, let's say, here, give it a different word, and you'll see how this animates piece of text, pizza text, pizza text, pizza text, piece of text, pizza text. Now it jumps. It doesn't transition, but it does keyframe, obviously. Let's go to more options. Let's go to path options. Some of these have keyframe or stopwatches, like this one. You know, this really isn't doing anything specific. That's fine. For some things, it just won't do anything that's apparent. But for this, you know, if it had something, I could play with it. Okay. If I were to create a shape, and again, I open up the transform, those are all the same. If I open up contents, open up rectangle, you'll see there's a transform in here, so there's actually two transforms, and this one has a skew and a skew axis. It also has a fill, and I can adjust the fill color and the fill opacity. It has stroke, and it has color, opacity, and stroke width. Also the miter limit, if I need to play with that. It also has the rectangle path, which has roundness. It has position, and it has size. So everything that you see, you know, don't be afraid to bounce into those menu items and see if there's something that you wanted to animate. Okay, we'll get more into animation, but that's a good start for any kind of thing. These things that you do with the motion blur, the speed graph, the easy ease, all of those things work together forever. Every single assignment will have all of those things.